Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. This is the Design Journal for Cool Name RPG. This is our fifth Design Journal, if you can believe that, even though we only funded about 2 weeks ago, week and a half ago, actually. And we're going to be talking today about how things are going on the project. We're going to discuss specifically the Tome of Requirements survey, the responses that we received, and how this is going to change and alter the work that we're doing. Now, for those of you who may not be familiar, the Cool Name Goes Here RPG is a project to get together a bunch of the best game designers in the role-playing game industry, bring them together, and make an incredibly cool role-playing game that we're then going to give away to the world for free. And so this is the design journal for that project, where we bring you in and show you every step of the way for the project. So we've got a number of people watching us tonight already. We're going to be recording this so that this will be available to watch later as well. And for the next 30 minutes to an hour, we'll sit here and we'll talk about how things have been going. So first up, just to give you a little bit of information on where we are at the moment. We just got off of this Monday, we just got off of our little hiatus as we stepped back to take a little break after the Kickstarter. As some of you may know, doing a Kickstarter is exhausting. It's absolutely exhausting. And it's good to take a few minutes to sort of catch your breath when it's all over. Maybe should have waited a little longer, but I'm just kind of excited to get started. So actually, I started working even during when I was supposed to be on my break. So at any rate, we are back in business. One of the key things that we're doing right now is we are setting up the late pledge system in BackerKit. That is just about set up. It's a beta program that BackerKit has, and they said it was fine if we were to use it. So they turned it on for us. I will have that up probably by this weekend, and we'll be able to tell our friends who are like, oh, I missed it, I can't believe it, that no, it's not too late. You can still get in on it. Now, as I've mentioned elsewhere, I am not going to be doing any additional stretch goals. We don't want to increase the scope of the project at this stage. That really is limited by the number of backers we get during the project itself. But what we can do is, by getting some additional backers, what that means is that we can get additional time from our consulting designers. We could potentially bring in additional writers so that I don't have to do all of the core writing myself, and that could speed up the process. And then we also, and this is the thing I'm excited about, is look at getting more art from Russell Marks. Now, Russell is the artist for Mechanical Muse, but when I talk about getting art, I'm talking about art for the core books that we're giving away. And what this would mean, and I've talked to Russell about this, and he thinks this is great, that art would be just as free to use as the text and the rules. So this is just one more way that we can sort of expand it out by bringing in more people. Zero Blade made the very good point. Don't burn yourself out on us. Yeah, don't worry, I won't. I just have to say that I'm pretty excited, which is part of why I'm jumping back into things. So, as always, if you're watching live, feel free to ask questions, make comments, whatever it is that you like. If you need clarification on anything, let me know. But let me go ahead and jump into things here. Today, we're talking about the Tome of Requirements. Now, the Tome of Requirements, if you aren't familiar with it, is a document that we are using as our guiding light for the project. We've said all along that this was the most important piece in terms of getting started, because everything we do from here is going to be guided by this. And so, to give you a little bit of insight, I'm not going to go into too much detail because most of you have seen this, but to give you a little insight, we're talking about things like the game experience. Obviously, the easy ones, like playing this game is fun. It might sound obvious, but I still want to make sure that we are focusing on that as a core requirement of this game. But also things like games played using the Cool Name RPG rules are focused on the characters, controlled by the players, their actions, and the outcomes of their actions. This is very important because it talks about a core design principle that says that at the end of the day, we need to make sure that the things that we're building are focused on the characters. So that's just an example. This is available for download. You can find the link in the updates on the Kickstarter. We're going to be setting up a page on the coolnamepg.com that we'll be setting up with all the downloads there as well. But for now, you can get it from the Kickstarter page. So what I want to do today is look at the results of our first major survey. And that survey was to ask backers what they thought of these requirements. Did they feel like we were on the right track? Did we feel they were unimportant? And I want to show you some of the results and talk about what these results mean to us as we're sitting here working on this. So let me bring that up here. I will share it with you as soon as I Get the right thing on the screen. There we go. So let's look at this. 56 responses. This is about a 10% response rate. So it's not a huge response rate. But then again, it was a pretty big assignment in terms of having to read through the tome of requirements, which is a tome, and then answer the information here. But it's still a pretty good sampling of the folks who have backed so far and gives us really good information about what people are thinking. So one of the first set of requirements that we talked about as far as the deliverables go was the idea of what we're actually delivering, what products we are dropping, what we're dropping for all of the backers. One of the questions we asked was about when we start offering incomplete playtest material. Now, by incomplete, it could be a page, it could be a tome of requirements, it could be concepts for a basic mechanic. We're talking about things that people can start looking at and offering their ideas on as early as possible. Well, as it turns out, most people were not too worried about this. This was not a key issue. Only about 5% of responders felt like it was vital to have this right away. What I saw in the later comments was that really they're more focused on the quality of what we're doing than hitting these key target dates. Now, I want to hit the target dates all the same. To me, this is important in terms of my work of keeping us on schedule and keeping us working towards our bigger goals. However, this tells me something important, that if we're sitting down, things that are in the tome of requirements are things that we ask ourselves, if we don't meet this, do we have to change something in what we're writing? Well, folks are saying don't change what we're writing just to hit this date. They don't think that that makes sense. And so as a result, I'm probably going to be pulling this one out of the tome of requirements. It's still going to be one of our core goals in terms of just how we're running the project, but it won't be in the actual tome of requirements going forward. Another example here is backers can download the first playtest version of the basic rules by Gen Con 2023. So that's by this August. I would like to have at least a basic rule set hammered out. And it might be rough, right? We're going to be working pretty fast to hit that target. But again, folks are coming back to saying that, like, yeah, I mean, more people really want to see that. But again, it's not a huge percentage. Most are like, look, it's important, but let's focus on putting out the best product possible. So again, I'm going to be looking very close at whether we include this one as a requirement. It might be a guiding principle of our project management, but it will probably not be a requirement in terms of, do we make decisions about rules, about systems, about how we design things based on this? It sounds like we probably shouldn't. Again, another one of these, the advanced rules by January 1st, same sort of responses. And we even see here the final versions by Gen Con 2024. Now, people are more interested in this in terms of being important and vital. This is still being looked at as a pretty important requirement. So this one I am liable to leave in, because I think it's super important to me, but it also sounds important to most of the folks responding to this. So this one I'm liable to leave in the system. This one I may leave in too, right? Because we're still looking at quite a few people who felt it was important to have a playtest version by January 1st. But these earlier ones seem less important to folks. So I'm not going to be as focused on those. I will be more focused on these. Now, this one, there's no question how folks feel about it, that the basic rules have everything you need to play a game. The reason why I spelled this out, as opposed to simply spelling it out, as opposed to simply saying it's going to have a bunch of good rules in it or simplified rules, is because you could have a basic set that really is a one-shot or a two-shot game, right? A system that allows you to play a few levels, but that's it. I would like to see our basic rules be playable for as long as a group wants to play them. I believe that some of the early versions of D&D Basic Edition were set up this way, were written this way. I believe that they allowed you to play for a really long time with just those basic rules. I would like to see our basic rules accomplish the same goal. And I think that this is pretty important to everyone here as well. And so this one is definitely going to be staying in. Going forward, we're looking at this as an easy to access, easy to use way to discuss Cool Name RPG with other backers. This conversation is really important to folks. Right now, our primary way that we're doing this is on Discord. Now, I have only just started to get back to Discord because ramping things back up again. That's an area where I just haven't been able to keep up because people are really active and really excited in there. I have pulled that information so that I can use it to build out our feedback document, but I haven't really been in it just yet, but I will be starting next week back into the Discord conversation. But folks want to be able to submit feedback and post files for review, and it's starting to look like it'll be that. Although I'm also going to be keeping the Facebook group open. The Facebook Cool Name RPG group is a group that started all of this, and I think that it was a really successful way to get things going. So I'm going to be working very hard at keeping that up to date as well. So those will be our 2 points of communication. Now, we still have a mailing list that folks can answer, can get just to get updates. We also have the Kickstarter page where I'll post updates. But you know what we do with those going forward, that's not really a great place for back and forth conversation. So we'll be focusing on the Discord. Let me go ahead and grab the Discord link and share that right now into the comments. I'm just going to need to grab it really quick. That's a really good point that we should bring this up for you guys so you can jump over there and get it. 1 second. Nice thing about doing this live is that when I see those things, I go, yeah, you know what? You're totally right. I probably should have the Discord link in here. That is a really good point. All right, well, I'll get that in just a minute. Discord decided to do an update when I went to grab the link off of it. So we'll give it just a minute here as it pulls things up. All right, let me jump back over to the studio here and we'll keep going, and I'll be back with that in just a few minutes. All right, so let's keep going here. Next up, there's some thoughts. I'm not going to dig into a lot of these right now. These I'm going to be summarizing in terms of ideas that people are offering us. There's a lot of good stuff there. I'm not going to go through it here because some of it is in different sorts of places. People entered it at the points when they thought of things, which is fine, but it makes it a little tough for presentation. So we'll be looking at that as a separate sort of presentation later that I'll be sharing out with everyone. But let's go ahead and take a look here. Playing the game using Cool Names RPG rules is fun. Again, I know you're probably looking at this and thinking, honestly, you're putting this in here, but I think it's vital because it's easy to get wrapped up in the process of design. It's easy to get wrapped up in the cleverness of a rule set. It's easy to get drawn away by that stuff. And I really want to make sure that we always keep that in the forefront of our mind, that the goal of this here, the goal of this is for us to create something that is really, really fun for everybody involved. And so by putting that in the forefront, that helps us to always remember we've got to be thinking about, is this fun? A core question that we should always ask, is this fun? So that one is going to stay in here. Everyone agrees with me that this is important. It seems obvious, but I do believe it's worth making sure that we call it out specifically. All right, I have got the Discord link. I'm going to drop it in here. There we go. And I'm going to also put this, the Discord link, I'm going to drop that into the YouTube description when we're finished. So that'll be there as well. You guys can grab it. I see Eric was suggesting putting it into the intro graphic for the live presentations too. Yeah, I'm going to put that in a bunch of places. I'm also going to get a permanent link with a little bit shorter, easier to read version that we can use as a redirect just to help folks out with that. But yep, we will definitely make sure that folks get that because there's a lot of very cool conversation going on in the Discord at the moment. I'm also going to go ahead for folks who don't see the comments. I'm going to drop this in as text as well, and we'll put it on here for a while just so everybody can see it who isn't noticing the comments when they're watching this. There's that Discord link. I'm going to leave that up for a little while we're talking. Another one here, players can start playing their first game with the basic rules with very little prep. Now, a few folks didn't have an opinion. A few folks thought it was low importance, but most people felt this was really important. And I agree as well. One of the things that is frustrating today, especially with how little time some of us have in today's world, with the amount of things pulling for our attention, is that if it takes too long to get into something new, sometimes we just don't find the time for it. Once we find the time, we appreciate we did it, but it's hard to find that time. But with a basic set that can draw you in quickly, I think we have the opportunity to get a lot of people playing the game that we all build together here. So that one obviously will stay in. Here's another one that's absolutely going to stay in, that the basic rules are fast-paced, simple, and fun. Now, you know, That's an important thing to consider because you could have pretty crunchy basic rules, but we want to make sure that the basic rules are a trimmed down, simplified version that really lets people play quickly and dig into it. The other thing I imagine is a basic rule set that are always going to be a game based on their own effectively, where there's going to be some players who are always like, you know what, I only play the basic rules. I love the advanced stuff. It's cool, but it's way more than my group needs. We just like the basic stuff. We go with that. And that's kind of one of the things I'm hoping is going to come out of this as we work on it. Looking at the advanced rules, offering a rich gaming experience. Again, I spelled this out because I want to be clear what advanced meant. What I'm looking at here with advanced is that advanced is going to offer you almost more of a toolbox where you can do a lot more with the game, where you get a lot more freedom, where you get to shape things and tune it in more to what you want it to be. It's a little more work, but the end result is you get a rewarding game experience for your effort. So it's kind of like the difference between buying minis that are pre-painted, which are cool and everything, and painting your own minis. There's still that rewarding feeling when you're finished at the end, right? And you're looking at that the thing going like, yeah, that turned out awesome. I'm glad I did that. That's the experience that I want for this, and it looks like folks are really in agreement on this as well. Now, looking at this one here, this is just simply saying that the rules that we create, anything we're creating in the game, should advance the goals in this document. Focusing pretty much on board with this, not as strongly on board with it as some other issues, but people aren't against it. And the whole idea here is that in film, there's this concept that nothing you put on the screen should be meaningless. It should be there for a reason. It either tells part of the story, enhances the story, directs your eyes towards the main characters that you want focus on. There has to be some value to what you're putting on the screen. I feel the same way about the rules, as I want to make sure these rules are helping us to accomplish our goals at every step of the way, whether it's just an ability or a set of modifiers or a full-blown character class. I want it to be focused on this. So I want us to be able to look at that and say, are we accomplishing the goals? And more importantly, are we not blocking any of these goals, right? All right, so let me go on from there. We now are getting into games played using a cool name. RPG rules are focused on the characters controlled by the players, their actions, and the outcomes of their actions. Everyone is on board with this, absolutely agrees. Only one person said unnecessary, not really sure where they were coming from. But, from their point of view, that wasn't a big deal. But it does sound like most folks want that. So obviously that's going to be staying in. The cool name RPG rules create a living, breathing, evolving sandbox for the players to explore and interact with. Again, pretty much important, or in the worst case scenario, no opinion. Not many folks didn't think that that was important. For me, I like to have living worlds so that when my characters say they leave when I'm running a game, they go down to the dungeon, they explore, they fight monsters, they come back with treasure. I want the town to feel like it kept going while they were gone, not like everybody just stops and pauses until the adventurers return and then they all start moving again, right? I want this sense that the world is going on by itself. And one of the reasons for that is that not only is that just kind of interesting and fun, but it also makes a far more immersive experience for all of the players. I would like to see us provide tools for that. And it sounds like folks are definitely on board with this idea of making sure we are providing a means of doing that for the GMs and the players who are running these games. Again, lots of comments in here. Some of them simple die rolls, very little math. Ease of running game without a lot of prep for the GM is very important. We're seeing a lot of really good ideas. Zero the Blade is saying, I have to see if the cool name goes here rules will help me with the tabletop RPG game I'm making. I hope it does, right? I hope that's what these design sessions do, is help other people make more cool games we can all play, right? By seeing how we do it and what we do. All right. And I do like this here. Someone said, I'm not that interested in the basic rules. I'm just thinking in terms of the project success. I love that sort of thinking because that represents the kind of thinking that I think really represents what we're trying to do here, is that we're not just doing this for ourselves, for what we want. If we did, we wouldn't ask anyone else their opinion. We just make what we want and go with it, right? We're trying to do something for the community, both for ourselves and for all of our friends and fellow players. And sometimes that means saying, I don't really need that, but someone else I bet does, and it sounds like other people care. So I'm behind doing it. And I love seeing that because that's what this is about, especially because we all know that at the end of the day, we're not going to be able to do everything that people want. We're going to have to do some things where you're like, that's not the rule I wanted, but that we're going to have to make choices. However, hopefully with the modularity that we're going to be building in, it'll be something we can do. Fantasy genre requirements. I'm not going to go too much into these. These are here more just to sort of lay some basic groundwork for the fact that we're making a fantasy game. Now, keep in mind, I did this because I think being a little more focused will make our lives easier. Doesn't mean people won't be able to build out their own other types of games using the same rule set. I think there's a lot of creativity out there and folks will figure that out. So powers and abilities that break the laws of physics, absolutely. Fantastic creatures, we're talking dragons, chimeras, the usual uh, z- entire zoo of creatures and monsters, a menagerie of monsters. So obviously, folks want to make sure of that. Non-human intelligent species can exist and are playable. Also very cool. We're talking elves, dwarves, the usual. Items and places with supernatural powers. No complaints here. Though it's a magical world. This is where it gets a little bit interesting. Divine beings can exist and can interact with the game world and its inhabitants. We start to see some fall off in how much people care about this. Um, I don't know how much people bring the gods into the games that they play, right? In D&D, the gods were always very present in terms of cleric abilities and divine magic. In my own setting, Aetaltis, they're a main part of how people exist. For me, that's because I'm modeling it on Earth, and I've looked at how people have interacted with what they see as the supernatural around them. But a lot of folks just aren't as interested in that. They just don't think it's really important. So I think that this is something we want to keep in mind, but it may not be as heavily weighted. That's something else we want to look at is whether we want to weight some of these things. And this is what I'm doing in my second draft, or more than second, but the latest draft of this. It's going to be going to our consulting designers. Death is not necessarily permanent. Really impressive how much that's not that important to folks. I actually do like permadeath, but that's not really always fun for folks. There's nice to have options, but then again, I don't know that I'll keep this as a requirement, right? We don't need to sort of build it and have to be able to support this in order for the game to exist. Um, this one more important, ghost spirits and the like, everyone wants that. Multiple dimensions, again, one that's less vital to folks. I mean, more than 50%, but not that important. And then here's another one, traveling between dimensions. Not too worried about whether or not we support that out of the box. And so this is another one that I think I'm going to drop because what I want to do is refine this list so it's not full of stuff that we're trying to do that isn't really important to folks. Lots of other ideas. Dimensions, the term has a sci-fi taste to it, parallel realities presented, lots of very cool stuff that we can talk about. And Michael in our comments now just said that the idea of divinity and gods feels more like a setting issue than a rules focus. I agree. My only thought on that is sort of saying, do we want to think about presenting out of the box a way of having a difference between divine powers and arcane powers? Because that's kind of a standard of the fantasy system, and it's a standard of the 5th edition games that we will be looking at next as our 5th edition considerations. So we'll see. We'll see what we do with that. I don't want to sit here and define who the gods are or how they interact, but I do think we need to think at least about how we would handle divine magic, or whether we'd handle it differently at all. I mean, that's part of the question that we're going to have to answer. All right, so looking at 5th edition considerations, these are things that, when we built this, it isn't to compete with 5th edition. It isn't to get rid of 5th edition. It isn't to defeat 5th edition. That's not what we're shooting to do. There's room for all of us here. This is not about monetizing, right? What this is, however, is recognizing that right now, 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons is the most popular role-playing game system on the market. In fact, by a large margin, the most popular, right? I'm not saying Pathfinder isn't huge. It's huge. It's awesome. I'm not saying that all the other game systems out there aren't really cool. I'm not saying Black Flag won't be amazing, because I think it's going to be very neat. But At the same time, we have to recognize this. And part of what I'm thinking about are all of the kids that I've met, right? My nieces and nephews, the folks in Saline when I went to the Saline D&D club and ran some games there, the folks locally, all of those people who are going to be us in 10, 20, 30 years. How do we let them know there are other games they can play and try them out without feeling intimidated or like they're going way outside of their comfort zone? I think that's important. I think it's important for us as designers to keep that in mind. I think it's important in terms of bringing on third-party publishers who at some point will want to take some of the things they made for 5th edition and convert them over so that they can also expand to a different audience with a different rule set. We have to keep those things in mind, I think. But let's see what everyone else had to say about that. So if they've only ever played 5th edition, it's easy to jump in. Well, it looks like more than half of the folks think so, but a decent number just don't think that's important. So, we're going to have to think really hard about this. Are we going to continue to make this a core requirement for the game? I'm not sure, right? We're going to have to be really thoughtful about this. I'm really looking forward to hearing what our consulting designers say about these specific considerations, because keep in mind that those folks have a lot of experience in the business, right? They have a good idea of what is actually going to resonate with other players and new players, and whether or not we're going to have problems getting them if we don't meet these. GMs who have ever run 5th edition will find it relatively easy to jump in. Again, more than half the folks don't think it's that important. Another one here, games played using Cool Name RPG rules have recognizably different feel from a game played using the 5th edition rules. Now, this one, folks agree is important. And to sort of define this again, for if you weren't really sure what this one is about, what we're saying here is that I don't want to just say they play this and they're like going, it's like 5th edition with different colors, right? I want it to be its own game. I want to give people a different type of game, a different type of experience. I think that that's really important, that we're doing something that feels different to folks so that they feel like it's worth taking the time to learn it and play it. Looking at our comments, one thing I do want to add here is this one came up. Consulting designers are awesome and should be treated like gods. Yeah, that's something we can consider. I didn't put that in the survey, Steve, but we will definitely keep that in mind. For those of you who don't know, Stephen Long is one of our consulting designers. He is, you may know him of Hero System fame among gazillions of other games, but good to see you here tonight, Steve. And yes, we do want to treat them well, though, because look, they're bringing a lot of skill and effort, and they're putting in their heart and soul into helping us to be successful at this too. So I don't know if godlike it would be the right term, but we absolutely want to be thankful to have these folks on board working with us. Let's see here. Next up, it's clear to players how to convert 5e content to the Cool Name RPG rules. Again, most people think this is important, but a lot of people just don't really care. So this I found really interesting. This whole section here really de-emphasized the importance of 5e in terms of bringing on new players. And they might be right? This is something that I really think is worth us all thinking about and considering. The tools provided by Cool Name make it relatively easy to convert. Again, a lot of folks just don't see this as being the most important thing. So this whole section here is one where I'm really going to be looking to the consulting designers to sort of give their 2 cents on this, right? In terms of drawing in players from 5e. But here's this line basically spells it out. We don't want to make something that's just 5e adjacent. We just want to make it something that people can grasp easily if they've only ever played 5e, that it's not too far outside of their realm of understanding. So, all right, let's go on from here. Gameplay requirements. The player character has expended their resources still as a meaningful way to participate in the game. Before I go on, there's another comment here. This is a great one. Add this in here. Unfortunately, it doesn't let me auto add these with the way I'm sharing this, but RPG with DBJ feelings, people want something new, not a 5e clone. Yeah, you know what? I do think that's it, right? Because look, if you want to play something that feels like 5e, I think Kobold's going to nail it, right? Kobold's already doing that. It's going to be a really cool sort of 5e adjacent system. It's going to be not a clone, but a 5e like game. There are also people doing open RPG and who are trying to make sort of a free one, but at the same time with the licensing that they've used now for the open system, the 5e stuff's already there. It's already out there and available. So, we really don't have to try to do that. That doesn't really make sense. It really needs to be something different. And DBJ, by the way, is another one of our consulting designers. So everyone wave hi to DBJ as well. It's nice to have you guys on tonight. This is awesome. All right, so let me keep going here, and we're going to talk a little bit about the gameplay requirements. All right, the player of a character that has expended their resources still has a meaningful way to participate in the game. Interestingly, no one disagreed with this idea. And in reality, a lot of games, when you run out of resources, you often do end up sidelined. And I think that it's pretty cool that everybody wants to find a way to keep people engaged in a meaningful way. Now, I've got friends who will burn all their stuff, and we're not looking to create a safety net for the dude who wastes everything in the first 5 minutes of the game. That's not really the point. But we are looking for a way to say that, if you're in an extended dungeon, everyone doesn't have to constantly stop because the wizard's out of spells, for example, right? Those are the sorts of things I'd like to have us avoid, are those sort of artificial metagame decision-making that takes you out of the game simply to keep somebody in the game, which is very weird when you start thinking about it that way, right? Right. So I'm going to go on to the next one. We're getting a bunch of comments, and I'll bring more of these in as we're going along, but I'm going to keep talking about this here. The player of a character that is dead, incapacitated, or otherwise unplayable still has a meaningful way to participate. So a little more debate in this one, right? If you look at this one here, people are like, oh, absolutely. But people are here are like, it's important, but maybe not that important or not important at all. For me, the point is that, again, this isn't to save someone who throws themselves into the dragon's maw. That guy can just sit and wait, right? But if they throw themselves into the dragon maw because that's the most awesome move possible and it's the right choice for the story and it makes the game more fun for everyone, we shouldn't then reward them by leaving them out for the rest of the session, right? That is terrible, right? That's a terrible way to reward really cool stuff. And death itself can be fun. It can be a great story. But if people are avoiding death because they don't want to have to sit out the rest of the game, they may make choices that don't really work for the story and the game that you're playing, and it'll be less fun as a result. So, people are still on board with this idea, but they're not that interested. Should this still be a requirement? I'm not sure that it should, based on the feedback. We'll have to see. This is anything that's sort of on the line. I'm going to be asking our consulting designers to fill us in on, right? Taking a look here, I'm going to just pause for a minute to look at some of the comments. I can grab a couple of these to share. Master of the Game had some comments here. And by the way, if you're not familiar with Master of the Game, he has a fantastic YouTube channel. So you definitely want to check that out, right? It's very, very good. It has a lot of cool stuff on it. I think it comes down to who's your target audience. I don't remember, but there were some demographics of backers. I wonder how many who did this had a lot of experience outside of D&D. That is a great question. I have some demographic data, not a ton of demographic data. It's always a tricky thing. But in reading this, he goes on to say that, folks reading this survey, taking the survey, seem to show a lot of experience with different systems, right? Same with on the Discord. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, they seem like it. And by the way, Juice, if you want to drop a link to your channel in there for folks, you absolutely should. Let folks know about your links. I can't really grab it while I'm doing this, but feel free to drop that in and let folks know about it. It's a great gaming channel. But yeah, so there are a lot. And, that's one thing that we've talked about before in the Facebook group is thinking in terms of who the gaming audience as a whole is versus who's giving us feedback, right? But I think most of the folks giving feedback have been really thoughtful about this. Not saying they just want to make something just for them, but they want to make something that's going to appeal to a larger audience. And I think that that's a really great thing that's happening. And I'm feeling confident that we're going to be able to do this. Another thing that was stated that came up was Michael Garrett had said, 5e variants are starting to trend. Don't want Cool Name RPG to be associated with that. It should stand on its own as an awesome system. I agree with you. DBJ gave a thumbs up to that as well. I absolutely agree. What I really want to see us do is create a cool new system. And this goes back to that question of, has a different feel, right? It has to just be its own thing and not just be where everyone looks at it and goes, yeah, that's 5th edition with the serial numbers filed off. So, all right, I'm going to move on here and we're going to hit a few more of these because we're got a fair amount to go and I want to make sure we finish. I don't want to go for more than an hour because I know folks have other things going on in their lives, new episodes of Mandalorian to catch up on and all of that stuff. So no spoilers, folks. The player of a character is dead. We did that one. How about this one? The game provides a satisfying system of in-game rewards for players who do their best during the game session. Everybody agrees, right? Everyone agrees that this is important, well, almost everyone agrees. Low importance in one case. A few folks don't have an opinion, but generally people agree that if folks are doing their best and putting their best foot forward, they get a reward. I'm going to tell you that we played a session campaign of Hackmaster using the 4th edition Hackmaster rules, which are really just 1st edition plus. If you think about AD&D 1st edition plus, but we played raw, like hardcore rules is written, just like Knights of the Dinner Table. It was a blast. You got rewards based on the gold you picked up and what you killed. And I mean, it was an amazing experience, but I wouldn't want every game to be that way. And we're probably not going to be leaning that way either based on the feedback that we're getting and our goals that we're trying to achieve. So let's see, players and GMs can easily figure out how to resolve the most common actions without looking at a rule book. God, this is important. We did some surveys before we started, and this is one of the things that slows people down. All they want to do is jump over the pit, and yet they're digging through the rule book looking for this rule. We want to make sure that we have a system that in some fashion allows people to figure this stuff out quickly and easily. How we do that, we can accomplish this in a lot of ways, but it's important that we do accomplish this. And you can see from the response to that, no question, that's important. Another one, if a player GM doesn't know the rule as written, needed to resolve an action, the base mechanics make it easy to make up something on the fly that works well enough. This is another one that's hugely important. There are a lot of games that do this well. I think that Savage Worlds does this pretty well. I think Hero System does this well. I think that there are quite a few where on the fly, if you just say, I think this is probably how the rule will work, and you just run with it. Later, you look up the rule and find out you were probably pretty close to right because the system is logical and repeatable and understandable so that you can make those sorts of calls without stopping the game to look up that one rule. And I think that that's a very cool thing when you can do that. Also was another one of the places that slows the game down. Encourages people to not roll the dice except in situations where it makes the game measurably more fun. Again, this is one of the things from my experience as a GM for years of watching other people play, of getting feedback. A lot of times people end up rolling dice for things that, they feel like they have to because there's a rule for it and it makes them do it. We want to make sure that we present our stuff in a way that gives people permission not to. Not saying we shouldn't use the dice. Dice are awesome. Randomness is awesome in games. It's part of what we like. It's part of what makes the world seem alive and out of our control and more of a challenge to overcome. But I do like the idea that we will know that it's okay to not always do that. And the game will support that for us. And I think that's very cool. Non-violent encounters, every bit as fun as engaging as combat encounters. Absolutely, right? I mean, keeping in mind that the original role-playing games came out of war games, combat was important, right? It was super important because that was sort of what birthed the genre. But now we've reached a point where those social interactions, the haggling, the diplomatic relations, the searching for things, the trying to puzzle things out, solve puzzles, all of these things are a huge part of our game now, and equally as important as that battle that's happening right in front of you. And, for example, in our own game recently, we've been playing a campaign, and the last couple sessions, there's been very little fighting. And at first we didn't notice. And then I looked at it and I said to the guys, I'm like, God, I'm sorry there hasn't been much combat. I know we all like to pull out our laser blasters and shoot some bad guys, but um, there wasn't a lot. And everyone sat there going like, wow, yeah, that was actually a ton of fun. We didn't really need it, did we? And so that's it. Not saying we get rid of combat. I love combat. I love tactics. I love all of those things. But it shouldn't, the other parts of the game should still be just as fun. DBJ pointed out exploration. Yes, absolutely. I am so much on board with that. I think exploring is such an important part of the gaming experience, and building that in. It's part of what's a huge part of the stories we read and the movies we watch. I think having a way to make that really fun is super important as well. All right, this is one that got a lot of positive response. Players have meaningful ways to contribute to every encounter, even if the situation doesn't fit. By the way, if you've heard these things before, it's because I've talked about them, but now we're seeing what all the backers think, right? This is different than me talking about. This is hearing what all of you are saying. Again, yeah, absolutely. Folks want to be able to have some way to be engaged. Most people think it's important. A few don't, and that's fine too. But the sort of situations we're talking about is everyone's going to the fancy ball and the barbarian is sitting there being a barbarian, and you're like, do we really want to take him? Would our characters really bring the barbarian along? We don't want to have a situation where you have to metagame things to make it work. Instead, we want to give players a way to be engaged and involved, right? I think that that's really important along the way. By the way, Zero the Blade pointed out as we were sitting here talking just about the other characters. NPCs need to have them because it adds more to the story and the world. Absolutely. It turns it from just miniatures on a board or a bunch of sort of distant characters into characters interacting with a living, breathing world. I agree. It's very important in the games. It's not necessary to reference a rule book to use a power spell or ability in a normal way. Generally, people agreed, but there was a decent amount that didn't, right? A decent amount of folks were like, look, maybe this shouldn't be a requirement. It still looks like it, so we're going to leave it in here for now. But I do think that this is an interesting opinion that, it's actually fine if you need to look things up to use them in a normal way. Players and GMs can perform bookkeeping operations without disrupting the flow of the game. I think I know where people stand on this one. I will say that although I don't want to interrupt the flow of the game, I have to admit that one of my own conceits that I have to keep away from my design thoughts is my love of bookkeeping. I am a total bookkeeping nerd. I track every single spell component I have when I play a wizard. I'm managed and where I've got it all stored because that's the kind of person I am. It's the way my brain works. But, this is a great example of where, we're able to think more about what people in general are looking for. They just don't want it to disrupt the flow of the game as we're going through it. I also take this to mean it implies that it's okay to have bookkeeping, but people just don't want it to stop the game. They don't want to be sitting there like going, wait, how many arrows do you have left? And everything halts while you figure it out. Let's see. When Cool Name RPG calls for a dice roll, rolling the dice increases the fun and excitement of a challenge. Yes, absolutely. Again, this goes back to that not needing to roll the dice, but I want to see us, and the reason I put this here is I want to see us be thoughtful that if we're asking someone to roll the dice, it's making the game more fun. It's not just a chore, right? Because sometimes rolling dice becomes a chore. It stops being a fun part of the game. So I want us to think about that as we're designing. Another one that there was very little disagreement on. Cool Name RPG rules provide players and GMs with tools that make the game fun at all stages. Again, it seems obvious, but it's something that's important for us to keep in mind. And again, this has to do with if you were to see in the original document, we're talking about things like everything from shopping to NPC interactions. We want it to be fun at all stages. We don't want to have these moments in the game that are just like, all right, everyone, we got to do this part that's going to be a pain in the butt. And it doesn't feel like a game anymore. It feels like we're doing homework so that we can play the game. Want to avoid that. Balance of player engagement is more important than mechanical balance. This is interesting. We have sort of a mix of ideas here. Let me just pull up really quick a description of this because it is a little bit of a strange question. So I want to just sort of share. Let me find it so I can find the details. Here we go. I'm going to share this one here. Balance only matters insofar that it allows every player at the table to remain relevant and engaged. Character balance is only important if the game makes it the most important thing. If the game makes every player important and relevant in a balanced way, what is on the character sheet becomes less important. And we should never make design choices based on the sake of balance for mathematics' sake. Now, this isn't to say that a logical underpinning is unimportant. It is vital that you have this. But what I'm trying to point out here is that this is the whole Jedi problem, right? If you think about Star Wars, in most games, there's a sense that in order for a droid and a Jedi to be in the same party, they have to have the same amount of power. I would like to see us make sure, and I'm not saying Star Wars always does this. There's been a lot of very clever ways of designing the Star Wars games that have avoided that problem. But in people's minds, this is a good example, right? Or Buffy the Vampire Slayer, that might be an even better one. There's Buffy, and then there's Xander, right? The key thing here is that the players need to remain relevant, is that Xander might not be, he's not really important to beating the demon. But as a player, the player needs to be important to telling the story with Xander. DBJ just made another great example. It's the Batman Superman situation. They're not mechanically balanced, but they, if you've got two people playing that game at the same time, they both have to be important to the story and to the influence on the story. And we need to give the GMs and the players the tools to do that. And for the most part, people agree on this one. I just think this is an important point to make, because sometimes it's easy for people designing game systems. And I've seen this, folks who haven't done a lot of game design, to get so hung up on the balance aspect that they lose sight of whether or not it's still a good story and fun, when at the end of the day, what people want is just to both be able to play. To give a good example of this as well, a real life example, is we played a hero version of the World of Aetaltis for a while, and I had a character named Dysart. And Heroes is a game that's very mechanically balanced. It's amazing in terms of its the logic on which it's built, the framework. But my character was not balanced to the game because I spent all of my points buying one really cool sword and a sidekick. And I never advanced my character at all. In the game, I wasn't really balanced power-wise with the other characters. I was balanced story-wise. I was balanced engagement-wise. That was where I was able to ensure the balance existed. And as a result, my character still mattered in the game as much as the person who had put every single one of their points into getting bigger, stronger, faster, more powers. So again, that's really important in terms of design, in my opinion on this. And it seems like people generally agree. Efforts to simulate reality must serve the requirements described in this document. Again, we, in this specific game design effort, I don't think we're heading for a simulationist system. That really isn't what we're looking at. We're looking for a more of what I call impressionistic. And actually, D&D is kind of more impressionistic. It sort of walks the line between simulationist and impressionistic, but more where you're giving the feeling of doing the cool things as opposed to a perfect replica of measuring it all out to the umpteenth degree. Let's see. Characters, adventures, and other content created for use with basic rules is compatible with advanced rules. Everyone agrees, for the most part, that this is true. Nothing I hate more than getting the starter set and then finding out none of it works when I go up to the advanced set. I'm going to go a little faster on some of these. Cool Name RPG rules support the actions, activities, characters, creatures, and stories common and necessary for a fun fantasy RPG experience. No doubt there. Here's one that is quite divided. Players could choose to play any type of living creature as their character. Not everybody agrees that this matters. I thought this was fascinating because I thought this was important. And yet, looking at this, it's not. And we're going to be pulling this one out as a requirement. We're not going to be working towards this goal because, folks are telling us that really this isn't really vital to an overall design. And I, from the opinions people gave, I have to agree with them. They made really good points. So that's another way we're going to be paring this down. Almost done here and almost out of time. So the timing is going to be good here. The GM has ways to reward players that grows the campaign, not just the characters. This one I put in, admittedly, partly due to my own personal desires for a system that I don't always see. I'd like to see ways that when you get your rewards, you can grow the overall campaign and not just your character, that you can create changes in the world, that you can say, cause that little town that you started in to grow and become bigger, add more character NPCs to it, add more stores, or however you want to do it. There are lots of cool ways you can grow the story without growing your character. And I think that would be very cool to see a reward system that allows that. Personal desire may not make it all the way through, but right now I really think it would be cool. And it sounds like folks generally agree with that idea. GM can easily create things on the fly. Yeah, everyone agrees this is important for the most part. Not everyone, but most everyone agrees this is important. As a GM, I can tell you there's nothing worse than, characters aren't going to do what you want. The players aren't going to do what you expect them to. And you need to be able to make stuff up quickly. And if you have to stop the game and go, hold on, I've got a stat for that. And you spend 5 minutes looking it up and reading it and everything, it'll break the story. And so it's better to be able to make things up on the fly if you need to. Clear how to apply modifiers, no real disagreement there. I just want us to remember this idea. That's why it's in there. Although I start to wonder if something is so obviously a requirement, whether it should be listed as a requirement. Maybe not, right? It's easy to select the size of a modifier, same sort of question. I put this in because it's not always easy in some games. I've played games where I'm going, I just don't know how to modify rolls. I don't know what the modifier for rain and fog is. How do I do that? What do I do with it? To be honest, I have some trouble with 5th edition. The whole advantage, disadvantage, sometimes I struggle with that because it's like, well, what if you have a bunch of disadvantages? Does that equal disadvantage? Does it equal advantage? And, I guess in the end, maybe it's not important, but in my brain as a GM trying to work it out, it ends up becoming important. And often it's important for the characters because they're going, yeah, but I'm going to die if I don't figure this out. And all of a sudden they care a lot about those modifiers. So, it's important to make them clear. This one here is interesting because it came out of a pre-campaign survey. It talked about the idea of how detailed should each rule be. And one of the things that came out of this, and this is how this particular question in the survey was written, was that it's important to have the core ideas, but to leave enough fog around the edges that the GM can adjudicate different sorts of situations that aren't covered. You could have every detailed situation hammered out and listed. And I've seen games that do that, right? GURPS is pretty hardcore about how things work. At least the 3rd edition revised that I always played was. But at the same time, what folks are saying here is they don't want something that's so vague that they're constantly making things up, but they don't want it so specific that they have to look up the specific rule every time. They want to sort of have a base idea and then room to work around the edges. And I think that's a really interesting idea. And it seems like people were on board with this idea. Requirements in terms of customization. Instructions for making your own rules and content are clear and intuitive. I want to make sure that we remember to do this because we want to make sure it's easy. We don't want people going, how did they make that spell? I don't understand. Was there a system? Again, you'll notice that part of why I'm excited to have Steve Long on board is that Stephen Long is designed lots of different game systems, but his work on Hero is exemplary in terms of creating a system where you know how to build your own stuff. I mean, I think that is the highest degree of that. And I don't know that we're going that far in terms of an underlying mechanical framework. We'll see if we end up there. I don't know that we will. But the whole idea, though, is that, part of me doesn't think we need to, because if you want that, Hero does that really well. We're trying to make something new and kind of different with a different sort of feel. But at the same time, people need to know how to build their own stuff without sitting there going I don't know, maybe this is right for the game. If a person follows the instructions, the rules and content they create will not break the game. A little less agreement on this one, but again, mostly people agree. The idea here is that you don't have to sit there and think like, am I going to completely end up regretting this spell when I give it to my players? We don't want people to have that fear. We don't want to have that feeling also with third-party products where people are like going, it's a good product, but because the rules don't really tell you how to make stuff, you end up with power creep and all sorts of other problems like that come into games when people start making stuff. I'd like to see it easier to make stuff right off the bat that's going to work. A person can easily add or remove rules from the game to tailor their experience and tastes. Okay, I'm going to say that I think that this is going to be one of the hardest things that we have to do. My concept of modularity is very important to me. I think it's important to other people because that's what these questions are about. But I think that the idea of creating a system where you can sort of Lego style plug things in and pull things out, and while being very thoughtful about how they connect with other rules and making sure that you create a framework that allows you to pull those out without completely breaking everything, I think it's going to be really, really hard. But I think we can do it. And I think if we pull it off, we'll have a game that's very different from a lot of other games where we can make it very simple to say, which encumbrance system do you use? And people will be able to name off their system, and the other person say, oh, I'm using this one. And then if you want to swap that out of your game, you're not going to break everything, right? It tells you how to do it in a way where all the connections reconnect and it's working again and the game continues to work. That would be beautiful to me if we can work that out. It would also let people have a glorious sort of creative outlet where people can create these sort of module style add-ons that they can release and share out with the world. And I think that would be very fun and very cool if we can pull it off. Same thing here. Once you start doing that, it's got to be easy to know which rules you're using, because you don't want to be sitting there going like, where do I look that up? Is that in this book? Is that in that book? We have to think of a clever way to allow people to add stuff in and pull it out to make sure that it's easy enough to keep running the game. And with 3 whole minutes to spare, that's the survey results, folks. It's pretty fantastic. I am going to be sending out the revised version to a number of our consulting designers at the end of this week. So probably tomorrow, early Saturday, somewhere in there, I'm sending out the revised version with a request to them. And this is not going to all of them. They answered a survey themselves saying what their availability and their interest was. But what I'm going to be doing is sending it out, and I'm going to be asking them to comment it. And they're going to go through and say, this sounds awesome. Or, oh my God, you are heading into a nightmare. We tried to do that with this game and it killed us, right? That's going to be one of the asks. The second ask that I'm going to be asking of these folks that I'm sending it to is that I'm going to be asking them to give us their general ideas on where you start. I had a survey on the Facebook group recently, and I'm going to try to figure out a way to get surveys onto Discord. I haven't done it before, but I had a survey on the Facebook group recently that talked about where would you start? I want to ask folks what their starting point would be. Is it a general base mechanic? Is it a concept about what style of play is like? Where do they start? And I want to just get their general ideas. Once we've collected those, I'm going to share that with you guys, right? Not necessarily word for word. I don't want any of the designers to feel like they have to like get this perfect and edit it and everything. I want them to be able to just sort of be off the cuff sharing, but I will share the concepts and ideas that they bring us so that you can see what these really experienced, talented folks are saying about this design process. And this will be really useful for some of you like Zero the Blade, who's making his own game or her own game, their own game, to see what these folks say. And so that's what's going to happen next. So the next time we meet next week, hopefully we'll be starting to talk about this as I start to get some of that feedback back, depending on what the availability of our designers are. And that'll put us on the step that we're all very excited about, which is the first step to some concrete mechanics that we can start talking about and looking at how we use them. So that's it, folks. I am going to wrap things up. Thank you for spending an hour with me. Thank you for all the comments. Thank you to our consulting designers who hung out with us tonight. This has been fantastic. It's good to see all of you, and we will be talking some more soon.